Rain tapped softly against the tall windows of Renly Manor, a sound that once soothed Rowan Halbridge as he moved through its grand, silent halls. But tonight, the rain felt sharp, like fingers tapping out a warning. Lady Ashbourne was dead. And though the house filled with soft mourning, flowers arranged with precision, guests whispering in velvet tones, Rowan knew there was something wrong. The manor, which had always been alive beneath its walls, now pulsed with a cold, uneasy silence. It wasn't just grief, it was fear. Rowan had served the Ashbourne family for 30 years. But to Lady Ashbourne, he had been more than a butler. He had been her trusted confidant, her keeper of secrets, her friend. She was the only one who ever looked him in the eye and saw a man, not a uniform. Now, as the family circled like quiet vultures in the drawing room, Rowan stood unnoticed by the fireplace, watching, listening. They wept, but their eyes were calculating. He had noticed it the morning after her passing. A drawer in her private study, left ajar. Rowan knew her habits like the rhythm of his own breath. That drawer was never left open. Inside, her journal, the one she wrote in every evening after the house went still, was missing. Lady Ashbourne never let it leave her sight. Rowan's fingers had hovered over the empty space, a strange weight settling in his chest. It wasn't just a missing book, it was a stolen truth. As the guests offered their rehearsed condolences, Rowan slipped away, moving like the shadow they all expected him to be. In the solitude of Lady Ashbourne's private quarters, he allowed himself a moment of stillness. The lavender scent still clung to her scarf draped over the chair. He picked it up, pressing it gently to his face. She had trusted him with everything, her fears, her regrets, even the plans she never dared to announce aloud. He remembered her last words to him, barely a whisper. "If anything happens, you must protect what matters." A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Ivy Drummond, the housekeeper, stood by the door, her face pale, eyes darting behind her to ensure no one was watching. She pressed an envelope into Rowan's hand. "They're moving fast, Rowan," she whispered. "Lady Ashbourne's will. They're saying it was never changed. But I know she did. She told me you'd need this." Rowan opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a small brass key and a note, written in Lady Ashbourne's neat script. "The truth is never in the open. It waits where eyes are too proud to look." Rowan's breath slowed. The family thought him invisible. But they had forgotten. He knew this house better than anyone. And he knew where pride had always blinded them. He looked back at Ivy, his voice low but certain. "They think this is over. It's not." As footsteps echoed down the marble corridor, Rowan tucked the key into his pocket. The game had begun. But this time, the quiet butler would not stay in the background. The Ashbourne family had always loved mirrors. Every hallway, every room, lined with gleaming glass that reflected their perfect image back at them. But mirrors, Rowan thought as he walked quietly through the East Wing, could only show what people wanted to see. They never showed what was hidden behind them. The brass key in his pocket felt heavier now. Lady Ashbourne had been cryptic with her note, but Rowan knew her well enough to understand. The truth wasn't in the safe or the study. It would be somewhere so ordinary, so overlooked, that no one with pride would ever think to search. He stopped at the old linen closet. It was narrow, dusty, filled with neatly folded sheets that hadn't been touched in years. Rowan had always noticed how the back panel of the closet sat unevenly, slightly off from the wall's curve. As a butler, he was trained to see imperfections others ignored. His fingers traced the panel's edge, and with a gentle push, it clicked open. Behind it was a hollow space, and inside lay a leather-bound journal, Lady Ashbourne's private words, untouched and safe. Rowan's hands trembled as he opened the first page. It wasn't just a diary. It was a record of confessions, affairs, hidden debts, even the truth about how she had intended to change her will in favor of a charitable trust that would strip the Ashbourne heirs of their fortune. She had feared her family's wrath, feared what Elena Ashbourne, sharp-tongued, charming, and dangerous, would do if her plans ever came to light. Now, those fears were reality. Rowan snapped the journal shut. He couldn't confront Elena without proof that would stand beyond whispered words. He needed witnesses. People who wouldn't dismiss him as just the butler. As if summoned by his thoughts, Ivy appeared at the corner, breathless. "Rowan, you need to come. Now." He followed her to the drawing room, where Elena stood with a small crowd of influential guests. She wore grief like a silk scarf, elegant, but thin. In her hand, she held a small vial. "I'm afraid there's been a most tragic discovery," she announced, her eyes sliding towards Rowan with a gleam. "It seems my late aunt's trusted butler had been administering her evening tea, laced with this." Gasps filled the room. Rowan's stomach turned cold. The family had made their move. They were going to frame him, erase him from the narrative as easily as they poured their champagne. But as everyone's eyes turned on him, waiting for a denial, Rowan stood still. Calm. Years of quiet service had taught him how to survive in the background. But now he realized, the background was his weapon. "Is that the story you wish to tell, Miss Ashbourne?" His voice was steady, each word sharp. "Because if we are telling stories, perhaps the guests would like to read one Lady Ashbourne wrote herself." He held up the leather journal, and for the first time, Elena's mask cracked. The silence in the room grew loud. Rowan knew he had their attention now. For a moment, the grand drawing room of Renly Manor felt frozen. The glint of crystal chandeliers, the polished marble floors, the portraits of Ashbourne ancestors, all seemed to pause, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Rowan stood still, the leather journal in his hand. He could feel Elena's fury burning through her polite smile. She wasn't used to being challenged, certainly not by the butler she had always seen as furniture. But Rowan had learned that silence was not weakness. It was patience. And patience, in the end, could outlast greed. "I believe Lady Ashbourne would prefer to speak for herself," Rowan said, his voice calm, yet slicing through the murmurs like a blade. Elena took a step forward, her tone laced with sugar. "Mr. Halbridge, we mustn't create unnecessary drama during a time of mourning." Rowan met her gaze without flinching. "This is not drama. This is the truth you tried to bury." He opened the journal to a page marked with Lady Ashbourne's delicate handwriting. The words, though simple, carried the weight of a hammer. "I fear Elena's ambition. She would rather see Renly rot than lose her grip on its fortune. If anything happens to me before the trust is announced, Rowan knows where to find what I have hidden." Gasps filled the room. Some guests looked away, ashamed at how easily they had joined the gossip. But Elena wasn't finished. She lunged, trying to snatch the journal from Rowan's hand, but Ivy Drummond was faster. The housekeeper, loyal and fierce, stepped between them. "Enough, Elena." Ivy's voice echoed through the hall. "For once, let's not pretend you're above everyone else." Elena's facade crumbled. The charm vanished, leaving only cold desperation. "You think they'll believe a servant's word over mine?" she spat. But the guests weren't blind anymore. Lady Ashbourne's voice, her own handwriting, left no room for lies. Among the crowd, Mr. Townsend, the family's lawyer, cleared his throat. "I have seen Lady Ashbourne's updated documents," he announced, his eyes avoiding Elena. She had expressed intentions to establish a trust. "I had been awaiting her final signature. But with this," he nodded towards the journal, "the intent is clear. Legally, it carries weight." Elena's carefully built tower of control came crashing down in that instant. Her allies, those who whispered behind teacups, began to distance themselves, stepping away as if her greed was contagious. But Rowan didn't gloat. He had never wanted their fortune. His loyalty wasn't for sale. He only wanted Lady Ashbourne's legacy to be honored. With a heavy breath, he closed the journal. Lady Ashbourne believed this house could be more than a symbol of old pride. She wanted it to become a home for those who had none. "That is the wish I stand for." For the first time that evening, people saw Rowan, not as a butler, not as a shadow, but as a man who had carried the weight of integrity when everyone else had faltered. Elena, cornered and exposed, had no choice but to leave the room, her downfall complete. Rowan looked up at the grand portrait of Lady Ashbourne above the fireplace. He could almost feel her quiet smile. The morning light poured through the windows of Renly Manor, soft and golden. as if the house itself had exhaled after a long-held breath. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered in the quiet corners. Rowan stood by Lady Ashbourne's favorite garden bench, holding the journal that had changed everything. The guests had left, the vultures retreating now that there was no fortune to fight over. Elena had been escorted away with quiet disgrace. The house was no longer a battlefield of whispers. It was, for the first time, still. Ivy joined him, carrying 2 cups of tea. "You did it, Rowan," she said, offering him a gentle smile. "You gave her back her voice." Rowan accepted the tea, but his gaze was distant. "I only wish she had lived to see it." From behind, soft footsteps approached. It was Emmeline Ashbourne, Lady Ashbourne's quiet niece, the only family member who had shown kindness without agenda. She had always been shy, overlooked, but Rowan now saw a quiet strength in her. "I read her words," Emmeline said, her voice steady. "I read about what she wanted for this place. She believed it could be a refuge, a sanctuary, not just a house filled with dust and portraits." Rowan nodded. She dreamed of a home for those left behind. Emmeline stepped closer, her eyes glistening with emotion. "I want to help you make that dream real." It was unexpected. He had always assumed his role would end at service. But Emmeline saw him, not as the butler, but as someone who had held the heart of this home when no one else did. Weeks passed, and Renly Manor began to change. The grand dining hall became a space for community meals. The East Wing, once locked and forgotten, was transformed into a shelter for families in need. The library opened its doors to children who had never touched a book. Rowan, who had spent his life in the background, now stood at the center of something new. One crisp afternoon, as he arranged flowers in Lady Ashbourne's memorial garden, Emmeline approached him with a letter. "Rowan, this came for you." He unfolded it carefully. It was a grant approval from a charity foundation, offering support for the home they were building. At the bottom was a handwritten note, "In honor of those who stand in quiet courage." Rowan felt his throat tighten. All his life, he had been a silent witness. But now, his quiet had become a voice. And it mattered. As he looked around, the laughter of children echoing through the gardens, the warmth returning to the manor's cold walls, he realized that Lady Ashbourne's legacy was no longer trapped in a journal. It lived, breathing and alive, in every corner of Renly. And perhaps, in his own heart too. Quiet loyalty holds greater strength than loud ambition. Standing for what is right may not offer comfort, but it brings dignity and the power to change lives. Power built on lies will always crumble, while integrity leaves a legacy that lives on. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that inspire, challenge, and stay with you.